Hello, and welcome to the only YouTube channel that combines beloved children's books with Marxist literary analysis. Today we are taking a short break from my American Girl series because although I'm having so much fun with that series and love working on those videos, they do require a little bit more effort than what I usually do, and that means they take a little bit longer to get out. There's more script writing, editing, and of course, with longer videos, they take longer to film. So I thought we would do something a little bit shorter, a little bit lower effort, but I wanted to keep that late 90s, early 2000s childhood nostalgia train going. So today we are going to be revisiting the first horror novel I ever read. This is Out of the Dark by Betty Wren Wright, and look at that cover. This book cover has been living rent-free in my brain for 2 decades. I'm pretty sure that at this point, this cover is like burned into my DNA. I remember it so clearly. So, Out of the Dark is a 1995 middle grade horror novel written by Betty Wren Wright. And Betty Wren Wright was a pretty prolific author of children's horror in the late 80s and early 90s. But this is one of her lesser known books. I think she's most well known for the Dollhouse Murders, which I have read, but this was the first book I read by her, and it was by far the one that stuck with me the most. So today I'm going to be rereading this book for the first time in 18 years and taking you guys along with me. So this is going to be a more casual reading vlog. I will talk about the book and my thoughts on it, and it's going to be very fun. We're going to have a good time. Before we get into the reading vlog, I do want to give you guys just a little bit of information about this book. So I'm going to read the blurb on the back so you can get an idea of what this is about, and then I'll tell you what I remember from having read this many, many years ago. So, not all nightmares happen when you're asleep. Jessica's nightmares begin as soon as she and her family move into her grandmother's isolated country house. Jessica is so afraid that she can hardly sleep. Her fears deepen as the ghostly young woman who haunts her dreams begins to appear, even when Jessica is awake. When Jessica discovers her grandmother's childhood diaries hidden in a drawer, she hopes they'll provide some answer to the ghost's identity. Instead, they tell a twisted tale of jealousy and hatred in which her grandmother had unwittingly been involved. Jessica must put the pieces of the past together to solve the mystery of the present. A couple of things that I think are really interesting from the synopsis is that even though this is a book that is written for children and marketed to kids, it includes a lot of tropes that we see in adult horror. There's the family moving into a new house, which is the setup for the Amityville horror, for The Shining. It's a very common haunted house trope in adult stories. There's the diaries from the past that shed light on the current haunting, which is also a trope that I've seen in a lot of adult novels. And if I remember correctly, the main character's dad is a writer. He's a struggling author, which feels very Stephen King. And I would be interested to know if Betty Wren Wright was influenced by Stephen King when she was writing this book, because if I remember correctly, this does kind of feel like Stephen King for children. So I'll be interested to see if that comparison is as strong as I remember it being. Of course, I had not read Stephen King when I read this for the first time, but having read some of his work as an adult, it does remind me of this. I do also want to say I believe this book is out of print. I wasn't able to find an ebook or an audiobook version, but you can find used paperback copies very, very cheaply. I got this copy for literally $1 plus shipping on eBay. So it's an easy book to get your hands on if you decide you want to read it for yourself. And I will link the Goodreads page for this book in the video description so you can read other people's thoughts as well. Hey, this is Sam from the editing room. I can't believe I have to give this warning on a children's book, but this book does contain explicit discussions of depression and suicide. Specifically, there is a reveal late in the book that is related to someone taking their own life. If that's a sensitive topic or something that you don't want to hear right now, feel free to skip this video. Okay, so I just finished the first chapter, and I am very much reminded of The Shining. So this lovely lady in the pink dress is our main character, Jessica. She seems to be somewhere in the 10 to 12 age range. It does seem like she goes by Jessie, not Jessica, so it's interesting that that's what they call her on the back of the book. But Jessie's family is having a very hard time financially right now. Both of her parents were laid off within a few months of each other. They have already had to move once to a smaller apartment. There seems to be a lot of strain on her parents' marriage, which seems to kind of be about the financial stuff, but kind of be about other things that Jessie doesn't know about. And they have decided to move to rural Wisconsin to house sit for Jessie's grandmother, who is going to be away for a few months. So they are in this big house in the country, and Jessie's dad is going to use this opportunity to write a book. I did not remember this, but the book that he's writing is actually an autobiography about his experience as a soldier in Vietnam. Yikes. And he's writing it on an electric typewriter, so I do really get Jack Torrance vibes from him. Hopefully he's a better dad than Jack Torrance. But Jessie is here with her parents. Jessie seems very tuned in to what's going on with her parents emotionally, which reminds me of Dani from The Shining. In Jessie's case, I think it's just that she's an oldest daughter, and she's a little bit older than Dani was in The Shining, so she's aware of why her parents are stressed out and what's going on with them. And where the first chapter left off, she's on her way to try to make friends with the girl who lives near her house, her new neighbor. So I'm going to keep reading this. I'm also going to go eat my lunch, and I will check back in with you guys soon. And changed into some comfier clothes, and I'm about 50 pages into Out of the Dark, and this is really interesting. I really like the writing style here. I think sometimes books that are written for kids oversimplify the writing too much, and I don't think that's the case here. I really like the prose. It is simple, it's easy to read, but it's still compelling, and it's not talking down to the kids reading the book, if that makes sense. I also really like our main character, Jessie. She is definitely a parentified oldest daughter, or in her case, only daughter. She is basically cooking all of her family's meals while her mom is working full-time to support her dad and his writing project. And I'm also an oldest daughter, so I feel like I resonate with her a little bit. But I do, like, it. She's doing a lot, and I feel like her parents are not appreciating it. I also was surprised by the disability rep in here, because this is a book that was written in the mid-90s, but there are some very frank discussions of Jessie's dad and his PTSD. The word PTSD is not used, that term is not in here, but he's describing things that are very clearly symptoms. And the next door neighbor, Tony, who Jessie has a kind of frenemies relationship with, I think she has a club foot. It's not described very clearly. It's not super clear to me what her disability is, but there's some kind of issue with her foot. She walks with a limp. She needs special shoes. So I was surprised. That was very interesting representation. I was also surprised by how much this book deals with adult issues. Jessie's dad talks very honestly with her about his PTSD. Like I said, her mom is very honest about not liking her new job. Jessie's mom has recently gone from being a manager in a white collar setting to working at a hardware store, and she's found that really difficult, and she's very honest about that. So I just think that's really interesting. I like that this book understands that kids are capable of reading about and talking about these things, and I like that it doesn't sugarcoat them or tiptoe around them. So yeah, I guess I should mention the plot. Since they've moved into the new house, Jessie has been having a lot of nightmares about an old schoolhouse and a woman with blonde hair who is just really angry and really malevolent. It's this other woman on the cover, of course. And as she was on a walk with Tony, she found out that the schoolhouse she's been dreaming about is the old schoolhouse in the middle of town. And she's not sure what's going on there. She just found a box of her grandmother's old diaries, and I think the diaries are about to give us some more insight. So yeah, I'm really enjoying this so far. I am now 100 pages into this book, and to discuss what's going on now, I have to start getting into spoiler territory. So if you are at all interested in what I've said and you think spoilers will ruin your reading experience, I do recommend reading this book for yourself. I have been very pleasantly surprised with how well it's held up. So I will put the word spoilers on the screen here, and I will keep it up on the screen until I'm done discussing plot details. So feel free to skip ahead if you don't want to ruin the plot twists for yourself. Basically, Jessie has now gone from dreaming about this strange woman to seeing her in real life. And the ghost has even tried to hurt her. There's a scene that I remembered very vividly from reading this book as a kid where Jessie is climbing up a ladder into the hayloft in a barn, and the ghost appears above her and starts shaking the ladder and trying to knock her down and hurt her. And reading that as a kid felt very intense. I remembered that scene being really stressful. It's one of the parts of the book that I remember most clearly. We've also gotten some more information about Jessie's grandmother, Eileen, through her diaries. So Jessie has learned that the ghost is probably Eileen's school teacher, because both the ghost and the teacher, Miss Caldwell, wear a gold heart necklace, which was given to her by her boyfriend, who happened to be Eileen's uncle. And the sort of subplot with Eileen's diaries revolves around a scholarship contest. There's an all-girls boarding school that is holding a contest. They're awarding one scholarship to a young woman from a rural community, and Eileen enters the contest. And Jessie, reading these diaries in the present of the 1990s, knows that Eileen did win the contest, and Eileen did go to that private school, but now she's wondering if there was some cheating or some sabotage involved, because Eileen's teacher was romantically involved with her uncle and was trying to kind of get on his good side by making sure that his niece did well in school. So Jessie feels like something might have gone on with the scholarship. Maybe it wasn't entirely honest the way that her grandmother got into that school. And she's trying to figure out why this ghost woman is so angry at her and is trying to hurt her. Okay, I just finished the book, and the ending got a lot darker than I remembered. So Tony, the next door neighbor who has a physical disability and is kind of just grumpy and I think understandably doesn't really want to be around people who are going to judge her for her disability, she goes out to the old schoolhouse that I mentioned earlier to kind of prove that she's not scared of it and that she's braver than Jessie is because she knows that Jessie had a scary experience there. Jessie follows her because it looks like there's about to be a thunderstorm. The weather's getting kind of scary. She just goes to check on her, make sure she's okay. There's a really awesome sequence where Jessie realizes that she's reliving the dreams that she keeps having about the schoolhouse as she's walking up to the building. And then she discovers that Tony has fallen into a small storage area in the schoolhouse floor and has hit her head. And there's a really intense moment where Jessie thinks that Tony might be dead because she's very pale and she's not moving. She's not dead. She's just concussed. But before Jessie can really process this, the ghost woman appears and pushes Jessie into the storage area as well, and then closes the lid. So now both of these girls are trapped in like a 5x5 space with no air. And there's a very harrowing moment where Jessie realizes explicitly that she is about to suffocate and die. And obviously that doesn't happen. She's able to push open the lid of the storage area enough to call for help. And her dad and Tony's dad run into the building. They came looking for the girls when the storm got bad. And then, I kid you not, the tower of the schoolhouse gets hit by lightning. And as all of them are running out of the building, Jessie looks back and sees the ghost woman sitting at one of the desks, looking peaceful for the first time. This is the first time she hasn't looked angry. The final chapter takes place afterwards at Jessie's grandmother's house. Her grandmother has come from the big city because she just had a bad feeling. She felt like something was happening. And she explains all of the pieces of the story that Jessie has been missing. And the potential suffocation of children is not actually the darkest thing in this book, so I have to give a quick trigger warning here, because the reveal at the end of this book explicitly talks about mental health and suicide in a way that I think is very typical of the 90s. So if you want to skip to the end of the spoiler section, absolutely do that. Basically, Eileen, Jessie's grandma, reveals that the ghost was not, as Jessie thought, Eileen's former school teacher, but was instead Eileen's classmate Sandra. I haven't mentioned Sandra before because she's kind of a minor character in the Eileen Diary storyline. But basically, Sandra was one of Eileen's classmates. She also really wanted to get this scholarship and go to this expensive school and be able to get a good education. But, of course, only one person can win. Eileen gets the scholarship. Sandra very publicly accuses her of cheating on the scholarship exam, and they have a huge falling out. And Eileen tells Jessie in this middle grade book that I read when I was 8 years old that Sandra never recovered from the bitterness and disappointment that she felt at not getting this scholarship, and that when she was in her 20s, Sandra left her infant daughter alone in her crib, walked to the old schoolhouse where she used to go to school, and committed suicide by overdosing on medication. This book, for middle schoolers, ends with a reveal that the ghost had died in a tragic suicide. Holy shit. Also, it's revealed that Sandra is Sophie's grandmother, the infant that Sandra left alone when she went to kill herself was Tony's mom. And the book ends with Eileen and Jesse going to the hospital to visit Tony, and Jesse's finally not afraid anymore, basically. And it's implied that Sandra's spirit is finally at rest. So that is it for spoilers. My final thoughts / review is that I did like this. I thought that most parts of this book were really excellent, and the things I didn't like about it, I think, are less problems with the book and more things that haven't aged well, because we should remember that this book was published almost 30 years ago. I really liked the writing style. I felt like this book was genuinely well written and compelling. It did not feel like the writing had been dumbed down for young readers. I was also, again, very surprised by how willing this book was to explicitly deal with pretty heavy subject matter. Jesse's dad is a Vietnam veteran with PTSD, and that is something that is discussed on the page here. Her mom is struggling financially and is really worried about the family's future, and that is explicitly discussed here. And as I mentioned in the spoiler section, no spoilers, but there is a reveal late in this book that revolves around some pretty serious and pretty dark mental health stuff. So I thought all of that was very impressive, because while this book deals with heavy subject matter, it doesn't feel age inappropriate. I feel like it deals with these topics in a way that a middle schooler reading this book probably could handle. So I was really impressed with that. The parts of this book that I had issues with, again, I think are just a product of the times. There's some language around disability in this book that is outdated. There's words that we wouldn't use now or that might even be considered offensive now. For example, using the word handicapped to talk about someone with a physical disability. While that was the politically correct language when this book was published, we would not use that word to describe someone unless we were being intentionally hateful and ableist, right? Similar stuff with mental health. I don't think that the portrayal of suicidal ideation in this is meant to be dismissive. I think Betty Wren Wright was trying to be sympathetic, but some of the language around depression and suicide comes across a little bit victim-blamey in a way that I think probably has less to do with the author believing those things and more to do with the conversations we as a culture have had since then, and us in 2024 having much more nuanced and complex language to talk about these things. So if you're interested in this book, I would just keep in mind going into it that 30 years is a long time and things change and the language we use to talk about things changes. But overall, I thought this was really excellent as a middle grade horror novel. I was surprised by how complex the plot was. Like I mentioned, there's at least 2 different subplots. There's 2 different timelines. We have a secondary POV character. This feels like an adult horror novel that has been dialed back just enough to be appropriate for young readers, which was really interesting. And I'll have to think about whether I've seen any other books do that, because this was really unique. And it makes sense that with this being my introduction to horror fiction, I would go through a huge Stephen King phase later in high school, because I do think that there's a lot of similar tropes and a lot of shared DNA between this and a lot of Stephen King's work, especially The Shining. So, yeah, if you're interested in middle grade fiction, absolutely, I recommend this book. Like I said, even though it's out of print, it's very easy to get your hands on. But that's kind of it for now. That's all I have for you guys today. Let me know if you enjoy this more laid back reading vlog type video, because I had a lot of fun and I would like to do more stuff with like this in the future. But in the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful day and I will see you soon. Bye!